Well, welcome everyone. This is Bill Gibbs. I'll be the host for the session today. It is just delightful to have you join us. And it is right exactly noon in the Eastern time zone. So we are very happy to have you join us today. And I know there'll be more even as we go along. Today, we're going to be talking about transformational servant leadership, leading and following from the front, with Dr. Reginald Freeman. I'll introduce Dr. Freeman in just a little bit and a little bit more about this presentation. If you've been with us before, you know that we have I'm just checking a message here from Solomon that says your volume is okay. If you can hear me, just type into the text chat that you can hear me. I'd appreciate it. Solomon, if you're the only one, then I recommend that you log off and log back in. I see there that others are saying the volume is fine, so we will continue on. Sometimes, Solomon, it will help if Solomon 15, if you log off and log on, sometimes you'll need to check the settings on your computer. Let me continue on. Our agenda is a little bit about capital, then some housekeeping. I'll introduce the presenter and we'll get right into the presentation. The program is primarily our presentation. We'll wrap up toward the end of the hour with a question and answer period, and then talk about the upcoming webinar coming next month, and then a little bit about how to get the recording slides and certificate. Looking over the list of attendees, I see many of you have a strong familiarity with our university, but there's always a few that this is their first time to join us, and so I always like to review just a little bit, not take too much time on it. Capital has been around for a long, long time. In 2027, we will celebrate our 100th anniversary, 10 decades of service. We're one of the very few universities, the only university that's private in the state of Maryland that is specifically dedicated to STEM, and really one of the few universities in the entire country that is specifically dedicated to engineering, cyber, computer science, and the management of technology. We're nonprofit, private, and accredited. Each of those are key words, but let me focus in on that accredited, because a lot of times people are joining us from all over the world and may not understand American accreditation. We are accredited with the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. In the United States, there are 6 accrediting regions, and we are in the Middle States region. This is the highest level of accreditation that any university in the United States can have. We're also authorized by the state of Maryland, the state that we're located in, to offer and confer degrees all the way from an associate's, which is a 2-year degree, right up to our doctoral degrees. Here is some little bit of housekeeping. We don't try to go into too much detail. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. George, it's no football team. We do have an esports team, however. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but at any point, you can type in the question in the text box. We will be watching it and monitoring, and we'll answer as many questions at the end of the presentation as we possibly can. Microphones and webcams are not being activated for participants, so the way that you'll communicate with us is through that text chat. We'll be sending a link to the recording and to the slides. This is being recorded even as we speak, and we'll send that out to all registrants. It'll also be available on our webpage. And for those that would like a participation certificate, this is a 1-hour session, and we offer participation certificates. I'll talk about how to get one at the end of the presentation. Today, we're going to have Transformational Servant Leadership, Leading and Following from the Front, presented by Dr. Reginald Freeman. And let me just talk a little bit about Freeman, Dr. Freeman. Dr. Reginald D. Freeman is the City of Oakland, California Fire Chief. He manages a force of more than 400 firefighters and staff. The Oakland Fire Department annually responds to more than 60,000 calls, and I'm sure they've been very busy with the recent storms. Before Oakland, Chief Freeman served as the Fire Chief and Emergency Management Director for the City of Hartford, Connecticut, and has also been a Fire Chief for Lockheed Martin. He also served as a civilian Fire Chief in Iraq for the U.S. Department of Defense from 2004 to 2008. Chief Freeman earned a BA in Leadership from Bellevue University, a Master of Science in Executive fire service leadership from Grand Canyon University, and a PhD in emergency and protective services right here from Capital Technology University. He's also a graduate and fellow of Harvard's University Senior Executives for State and Local Government at the Kennedy School of Government. He's a graduate of the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Program. He's an adjunct professor for Anna Maria College, Capital Technology University, and the University of Florida. He lectures in undergraduate and graduate fire science and in Master of Public Administration programs. He's credentialed as a Chief Fire Officer, that's the CFO, and as a fellow with the Institution of Fire Engineers. With that, I want to welcome Dr. Reginald Freeman. We're going to take a transition point where I stop my slide deck and he shares his, so give us a moment to do that. And Dr. Freeman, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Bill. And
I think you may have chosen the wrong screen again.
that's right. That's right.
Those of you that work with Zoom know that if you have multiple monitors, you have to be very careful on the one that you select to share. So give them a moment to do that. And there you go. Well, that's the same one again, but.
1 second here. Oh, I know how to say it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, 3 times a charm. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for that very kind introduction. And it's truly my honor to be here on behalf of our Honorable Mayor, Shane Towle, and all of our roughly 600 firefighters here in the City of Oakland. And I have the esteemed pleasure to talk about 2 things that are passionate to me, I'm passionate about, are very important to me, and that is the fire service and leadership. And so this is probably going to be the least academic presentation that you have probably participated in with Capital Tech, but I'm looking forward to the discussions. I'm looking forward to the questions and answers segment that we're going to have at the very end. And let's just jump right into it. So transformational, most of you have probably heard of transformational leadership and then servant leadership. And when people ask me and say, well, Reggie, what is your leadership style? I say, well, pick one. The situation and the people that I am interacting with or engaging with is going to dictate how I respond as that person in position of authority at that very moment. And I have to exercise leadership. And there are literally hundreds of different leadership styles that are out there. And so being that I have been a student of leadership for quite some time, I have really clung on to transformational leadership and servant leadership and really combined the 2 philosophies, which it has been emerging as of late as a leadership style in itself, transformational servant leadership. And so before we jump into the philosophy and ideology of both transformational leadership, servant leadership, and then finally transformational servant leadership, let's talk a little bit about the fire service and the history of the fire service. So all of you have seen firefighters, your town, your city's bravest, responding to calls. It doesn't matter if it is a vehicle extrication call or a structure fire or a hazmat call, a technical rescue. We as firefighters in the fire service, when our residents or visitors to our town and cities are in need, no matter what the emergency is, we respond, and we refer to ourselves as an all hazards mitigation organization. And so our beginnings go back to the Crusades. So as you can see here in this picture, a photograph of some knights, and these knights are specifically from the Isle of Malta. And if you think about the Isle of Malta and you think about the Maltese cross and you're wondering, is there a connection? Absolutely, there is a connection. So the Maltese cross, and the Maltese cross is what is adorned on this knight's chest, or these knights. That is what those knights wore when they were fighting the Saracens. So we got our homage as firefighters, because during the Crusades, when the Knights of Malta, when they were fighting the enemy, the Saracens, they had these fire bombs, and they would throw these fire bombs over the wall. And then, of course, the knights underneath would catch on fire. But then the Knights of Malta, they're the ones that would go and respond and put the fire out for their fellow knights. Hence, the Maltese cross has always been associated with service ever since then. And so you have the Maltese cross, which is the 8 points, and then you have the Florian cross. And there's a lot of confusion. You would hear firefighters or even normal civilians refer to what we wear on our shoulders as our patches as Maltese crosses, but they're actually Florian crosses. And Florian comes from the saint who gave his life. He was actually a firefighter in Rome, and he gained his sainthood for refusing to praise pagan gods. But he was actually a firefighter in Rome. He wasn't the best firefighter in Rome, but he was the hardest working and most liked. And he stood up for what he believed in, and he protects us as Saint Florian, and that is where we get our Florian cross. All right, so moving on to a little bit more history, some more history about the fire service. We have gone through different iterations, and I guess you could say transformations, if you will, from technology, for what we use to suppress fires and even to respond to incidents. But my absolute favorite firefighter in the United States or even internationally, my favorite firefighter is firefighter Molly Williams, who is pictured here. So firefighter Molly Williams, she was actually a slave in New York, and her owner was a wealthy merchant who owned a lot of businesses in New York City. And she was a member of Oceanus Company number 11. Now, Oceanus Company number 11, of course, there were several members that belonged to this volunteer fire department, but firefighter Molly Williams stood out, not only because she was a slave, but she was also a woman. So she is the first known woman firefighter in the United States. Now, even being enslaved, when a reporter talked to Molly and interviewed her and, observed that she really loved what she was doing as being a firefighter, he asked her, well, why do you love being a firefighter so much? What is it about this job that really excites you? And her response is, I could see myself doing nothing else but being a firefighter. I love old 11s. Now, imagine that as a slave and someone who does not have freedom, but being a firefighter is something that she loved doing. That is the power of the fire service, the power of being able to serve and to be of assistance to other people in their time of need and to truly make a difference. By far, my favorite firefighter in history is firefighter Molly Williams. And so when you think, fast forward to today, and you think about the environment that firefighter Williams had versus what we have today, it's a little different. Thankfully, we have progressed as society. We have made some inroads. We are not where we want to be just yet, but for the first time in our country's history, we have a woman serving FEMA. At the same time, a woman is serving as our U.S. Fire Administrator. At the same time, a woman is serving as our Deputy U.S. Fire Administrator. So a long way to go, but very proud of the strides that we're making to have a ism-free workplace, racism-free, genderism-free, sexism-free, cronyism-free, nepotism-free. But that has been part of our history. If you look back at the fire service, and even when I got on the job 22 years ago, it was very autocratic. You did not have any discussions. There was no talk about how you felt or what your opinion was. It certainly was not inclusive. Equity was definitely lacking, and you could not become a firefighter if you did not already have family or friends on the job that were able to assist you in getting hired. And so you had forced compliance versus voluntary compliance. And again, through the decades, that is slowly changing. And even the expectations of our beloved fire service and our persons in position of authority have slowly changed. In the 70s, it was totally appropriate for someone to be a fire chief and only have a high school diploma. In the 80s, the expectation, the bar was raised a little bit, and a fire chief could have an associate's degree or was expected to have associates. In the 90s, a bachelor's degree, 2000s and above, graduate degrees, a master's degree was certainly the expectation. And a lot of my colleagues, they have their terminal degrees as well, as we look at where we're at in 2023. So as time goes on, so does the expectations. Now, for me, my journey has been very unique. My career started in Mississippi as a firefighter EMT and experienced unfathomable racism and discrimination. And I left Mississippi and, as Bill mentioned, went on to serve my country as a contractor in Iraq, working for Department of Defense. Fast forward, as of May 17, 2021, I have had the esteemed honor and privilege of serving the City of Oakland as their 31st fire chief. And that has truly been an honor. And here's just a brief snapshot of what the Oakland Fire Department looks like from an organizational chart perspective. So I have my executive assistant. I also have XO, executive officer, who's a captain. I have my chief of staff, who on the org chart is assistant to the director, but really my chief of staff, who's my right hand, who does a lot of work for us. And then down from there, we have our operations bureau, which is ran by a deputy chief. And beneath the operations bureau, or beneath the deputy chief, there's an assistant chief of operations, two actually, a captain of operations, and then of course 3 different shifts with battalion chiefs assigned to those 3 shifts. And then of course all of the companies, engine, ladder, and the heavy rescue companies in operations. From there, we have a deputy chief of support services, which are dispatch or dispatch center or fire alarm communications division falls under our deputy chief of support services. And of course, fire prevention bureau, where our fire marshal leads that division with roughly 50 members, fiscal and admin, all the folks here at headquarters who are behind the scenes working very hard to make sure that the membership on the line is taken care of. And then also emergency management falls underneath the fire department. So we do have an emergency manager with our team that does exceptional work and also manages our core and our CERT team. CERT is Community Emergency Response Team, which, by the way, very proud of the fact that they won National CERT Team of the Year in 2022. So huge feat for our hardworking members in emergency management. And then last but not least, our emergency medical services division, which is ran by a true manager and leader in Miss Vina Swart Ratliff. And then of course, our macro team is assigned to our EMS division as well. So moving along with some more specifics about OFD, we were established as a professional department on March 13th, 1869. We have 24 engines, 7 trucks, a heavy rescue, and there are 28 FEMA-sponsored urban search and rescue teams in the United States, and we are very proud of the fact that we are a host agency to one of them, which is Task Force 4. There are 8 FEMA-sponsored USAR teams in California, and of course, we are certainly honored to be able to be the lead for Task Force 4, which has 13 participating agencies in it. Run about 71,000 calls a year, 600 personnel, and our firefighters work 48 hours on and 96 hours off. When I got on the job, it was 24 hours on and 48 hours off. So firefighters have a pretty good schedule. And we, last but not least, a strong mayor form of government with the city administrator running the day-to-day operations. All right, now to the good stuff. You know, when we talk about leadership or we talk about managing, I always bring it back to persons in positions of authority. And you've probably already heard me say that a few times already. But for those of us in positions of authority, there is a distinction between a leader, a manager, a friend, and a boss. You know, sometimes, in most instances, persons in positions of authority who are very versatile and very, very flexible and they're able to adapt to scenarios and situations, they can be any one of these 4 things. They know when it's appropriate to take one hat off and put another hat on. And so that is the true power in transformational servant leadership, is you actually are, you're programmed to be able to know when it's time to be a leader. You're programmed to know when it's time to be a manager. Sometimes you have to be their friend, and oftentimes, of course, you have to be the boss. And you could be friendly, you could be approachable without compromising your position of authority. And a lot of times we have been autocratic in the fire service because of that one reason. We did not want to compromise our position of being the boss. But I tell people all the time, there's a difference between someone doing their job and someone working for you. So me being in a position of authority, I truly want my folks to work for me, for Reggie Freeman, not to do their job for Chief Freeman. And the difference between the two is influence and inspiration. Leaders influence and inspire, managers motivate, and managers motivate always by one of two means, either fiscally or punitively. And so being able to know how to navigate through being a leader, a manager, a friend, and a boss is very, very, very important to the success of any person in a position of authority. And that is oftentimes reflective of your EQ, your emotional quotient. So we're all familiar with IQ, intellectual quotient, but emotional quotient, also known as EI, emotional intelligence, is your ability to know and understand yourself and your emotions, and how your body language or your physical reactions or the things that you say impact other people. But it starts with self-awareness, but then it transcends into you being able to dictate the outcomes of engagements. So one thing that I consistently do, if someone comes to my office and we're having a very important conversation, I go around my desk. You can't see everything quite clearly now with the camera angle, but I go around my desk and there's two chairs. And so if there's an important discussion to be had, I sit in one of those two chairs, make sure the chairs are facing each other so there's no physical barrier between me and the person I'm talking to. I also make sure that I do that because I don't want to be sitting where I'm currently at, because if I hear a ping and I'm getting an email, I don't want to be tempted to turn my head as that person may be in mid-sentence and look at what email I just received, or if my phone rings, to try to look at the caller ID to see who it is. Because when you do that, you're sending a clear signal to the person you're communicating with, is that, well, what they have to say or that particular scenario at the moment is not that important. So I remove myself from being in those situations and really focus on that individual and the issue, and practice active listening as well as appreciative inquiry. Those two things are very important as it pertains to emotional intelligence. And so, heard a little bit about emotional intelligence. We heard a little bit about being a leader, a manager, a boss, and a friend. And let's talk a little bit more about transformational leadership. So the first version of transformational leadership was introduced by James Dalton and then expanded upon by James McGregor Burns in the great year of 1978. It's a great year because that happens to be the year that I was born. But James McGregor Burns, what's interesting about him is that he actually did presidential biographies. That is what really got him to look at transformational leadership and what it meant. And Dalton and Burns' version of transformational leadership really focused on the organization. Now, fast forward to 1985 to Bernard Bass's version of transformational leadership, which is one that I really study continuously and try to implement where I can. Bass focused on the individual. So the individual, if you empower, if you invite, if you solicit feedback from the individuals that are actually doing the work, that can then transform the organization and allow the organization to accomplish lofty goals or even the smallest goals or objectives that are set or established. Now, looking at what some characteristics are that pertain to transformational leadership, there are a few. There are a few things that that you could study and try to emulate to become a more in tune transformational leader. And that is first, self-awareness. So you heard me mention self-awareness when I was speaking to emotional intelligence. So making sure that you have a clear understanding of who you are, how you react and how you respond, but more importantly, understanding what your strengths are as well as your weaknesses. We can't hold other people accountable until we first hold ourselves accountable. Authenticity, being authentic, is a key characteristic of being a transformational leader. And I don't know about other professions, but I can tell you in the fire service, a firefighter can smell someone who is disingenuous or not authentic a mile away. And so it's too easy to be yourself, and it's too easy to be genuine. And so be sure that you are being authentic in your engagements. Next is having a vision. Now, a key part of leadership is having a vision and driving people towards that vision. But the most important element about vision is that it's not necessarily coming from you as that person in a position of authority. It's something that we as a team have come up with in regards to where we're at and where we want to be. And if you allow the members of the team to help establish that vision, you can get there with less resistance to change and more engagement from the members who are actually doing the work. And set ambitious goal. Of course, you're always going to pick the low-hanging fruit, but make sure that the goals that you set are really ambitious, and that is something that is going to truly make the organization better for many, many years after you and all the other current members of the team are long gone. Fourth out of 5 for characteristics for a transformational leader is being empathetic. I cannot tell you how many times I have reached out to members of my organization when I learned that something challenging was happening with them, whether it be personal or professional. For our members to know that they are much more than just what some would refer to as an employee number. And that is something that we don't use. We don't use 2 words we don't use in the Oakland Fire Department: employee or subordinate. You're either a team member or a family member in the Oakland Fire Department. And we believe that to our core. And so as the chief of the department, setting that tone is so very, very important. We have a duty to explain, not a duty to debate. And so for us to be empathetic as persons in positions of authority, that really generates an emotion for those members under your command to want to work for you, because they know that they are valued and that they are a productive member of the team, or looked at as a productive member of the team. And then last but not least, encouragement. There's never a bad time to approach someone and to thank them personally for a job well done. Sending an email, text message, phone call, that's fine. But if you have an opportunity to send those thanks in person, to extend your hand and look that person in the eyes and say, Mary, I really appreciate the hard work that you did at that last community event. I continue to get nothing but great feedback. Thank you so very much. As a matter of fact, I printed out this Chief's Award of Excellence for you for your hard work and dedication and the outcome that we had. So keep up the great work. You'd be surprised about the number of folks that would prefer that. And a Harvard study was conducted many years ago, and it showed that the members of the team preferred their boss to come by their workstation and to just acknowledge their hard work and to thank them in person for the job that they do, rather than get a 2% raise. And I tell people all the time, as I reference that study, if it was a 5% raise, maybe the outcome would have been different. But at 2%, they would prefer their boss to come by their workstation and just to thank them. And I can think back in my own personal experiences when my boss came by my workstation, or if my boss never came by my office, if you will. It was very much appreciated when they took the time to come to my office and to say hello or to have a conversation. So self-awareness, authenticity, vision, empathy, and encouragement are characteristics that you can start practicing to be a transformational leader. Now, one of my favorite athletes of all time, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, with all due respect to the late, great Kobe Bryant, is Michael Jordan. Now, some of you remember the flu game, as they called it, that happened June 1997. I remember this game. I remember that month and year, because it happens to be the month and year I graduated high school. But I remember this game, and they were calling it the flu game, but come to find out, Michael Jordan had food poisoning from a pizza that he had ordered late the night before. Now, Michael Jordan will never be looked at as a servant leader. History will never remember Michael Jordan as a servant leader, because he was very autocratic. He was very driven, had very, very high standards, and there was a certain way that he conducted himself to get the results that he wanted from his teammates. I'll let you research that on your own. But a transformational leader he was. He used idealized influence to get the results that he wanted as the leader of that organization. And so this is a prime example of him having idealized influence and using himself as an example. Even with flu-like symptoms, having food poisoned, Michael Jordan, he played for 44 minutes and he scored 38 points in 44 minutes. He was so dehydrated, he even contemplated getting an IV. Now, using himself as an example, because he knew that every single player on that court had a role to play. And if they did not execute their specific duties out of that specific position, it was going to throw the balance off of the team, and they would have a hard time in this championship game. In the NBA Finals, it was going to be hard for them to obtain their ultimate goal, and that was to be, again, NBA champions. So he was certainly a transformational leader. Now, another person who I absolutely admire in history as a student of history, and I really, since I've been a kid, really have admired the history of World War II, is Winston Churchill. Now, March of 2020, we had a board of directors meeting for NFPA, and it was in London, and I was very excited because I've always traveled through London, but never vacationed in London or spent any time in London. But I also knew that Churchill's bunker was in London. There was no way I was going to go to London without visiting Churchill's bunker. So what you're looking at is the picture of where Churchill actually slept and worked. All the furniture is original. This is exactly how he had his room set up. And Churchill was not the first pick for prime minister. Churchill is someone who you would probably refer to or look at as a black sheep, someone who was not necessarily considered an academic nor a gentleman, for the simple fact of he liked to enjoy certain adult libations, and he smoked at least 7 cigars a day. He was not their first choice for prime minister, but he was the right choice. And after pleading with President Roosevelt to join the war, we did not do so until Pearl Harbor. And then, of course, we joined the Allied forces and defeated the Nazis and the Japanese and the Italians. And so his leadership was most certainly transformational because of his consistency and his internal calling and fire that was burning to save the West and to save the United Kingdom at all costs. And so a transformational leader he was, and he'll always be remembered as such. And now, talking a little bit about transformational leadership, let's discuss servant leadership. And again, one of my favorite leadership ideologies and philosophies. When you look at servant leadership and everything it stands for, it's fairly self-explanatory, but Robert K. Greenleaf, he established servant leadership in an essay that he wrote, which was Christian-based, which, long story short, to make a very complex dynamic very simple, if you turn an organizational chart upside down, that is servant leadership. And the way that Greenleaf saw it and his philosophy was really, really surrounding the fact that it wasn't the person in the mailroom or the janitor who worked for the CEO. The CEO works for that person in the mailroom and the janitor and everyone in between. It's their job as that person in the highest position of authority to serve the organization, to ensure that everyone had all the resources that they need to do their job, to ensure that everyone had all of the support, that everyone had the tools, the equipment, the guidance to be able to execute their duties and responsibilities. And so, being a student of servant leadership for quite some time now, there's still things that I learned that improve my leadership abilities within the organization, and I'm forever grateful for that. And now there's 10 specific characteristics that servant leaders have or they practice. And that is empathy, which we heard that before with transformational leadership. That is listening, but I would say active listening, not just listening, because you have active listening and then passive listening. So you want to ensure that you practice active listening, healing, awareness, situational awareness, things that are happening around you, but also self-awareness, persuasion, being able to persuade, but not necessarily argue. Conceptualization, having foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, which is very important. And last but not least, building community. And I look at building community as in the same realm as building relationships and engaging with your stakeholders. So those are the 10 traits that servant leaders practice or servant leaders have, whether it be through training or naturally. Now, with all of this, we can't necessarily be effective leaders or practice or exercise leadership without, of course, holding folks accountable. And so if we hold folks accountable, that is our ultimate goal. We have to first set expectations. People have to know what's expected of them. Secondly, we have to invite commitment. So as a person in a position of authority, as the chief, just because I can do something doesn't necessarily mean that I should. Because I have members of the team that are very well trained, that are very much involved, and they have a stake in the success of the organization. So I should really invite their participation into what we do and how we do it as an organization. And so it's one thing to identify tasks, it's another to actually measure the success of those tasks. And so we have to measure progress, provide the feedback that's necessary to give individuals the information that they need to adapt, pivot, and regroup, or to continue on the course that they're on to get the job done. And then, of course, one main element of accountability or holding folks accountable is that there has to be consequences if direction is not followed. So there has to be a link to consequences. And last but not least, evaluate effectiveness. Now that has to be done from the individual, group, or even organizational level. You have to consistently evaluate effectiveness as it pertains to holding folks accountable. And we can't dare hold other people accountable before we hold ourselves accountable. So transformational servant leadership, leading and following from the front. From this perspective, great leaders know when it's time to follow. And so learning that followership is so very, very important. Always ask why, always ask, how can I help? Always ask, what is it that I can do to assist you? Secondly, develop self-discipline. And that also is tied to emotional intelligence, being able to know that everything does not warrant a response. And we should praise in public and abolish in private. Last but not least, seek accountability. One thing that I encourage everyone to do is to participate in 360-degree evaluations. It allows the members of your team to provide you feedback that for those who report to you, for persons that you report to, and then of course, your colleagues that may be fellow directors or fellow managers or fellow supervisors, they can also give you feedback. And then last but not least, practice patience. And I tell people all the time, I'm high speed, low drag. So this is something that I work on all the time is being patient. So we can't hold other people accountable if we don't first hold ourselves accountable. Now, 10 ways to become a better transformational leader starts with learning more about your perspective, your specific style. As much as I love Churchill, if I tried to emulate everything that Churchill did and who Churchill was, I would fail miserably. I have to find my own style and you have to find yours. Second, encourage creativity. That is the only way that we're going to grow as organizations and grow as individuals, is to be creative and to be ingenious. And of course, third, serve as a role model to your team. You can't expect people to listen to you as you give them direction, or to say, this is how we're going to function or conduct ourselves, and you're doing the total opposite. You cannot be a hypocrite and be in a position of authority. Fourth, being passionate. Be passionate about what you do. Do what you love and love what you do. I tell people all the time, I rarely consider myself coming to work, quote unquote. I get up in the morning very much ready to serve our members and to serve our community, and have a blast doing it every single day. Number 5, listen and communicate effectively. So critically important. Attitude. Attitude always dictates your altitude. Attitude dictates your altitude. So make sure that you have a great attitude, because that is infectious, especially if you're in a position of authority. Everyone knows when you're not having a good day. So always try your best to put on that smile. 7, encourage people to make contributions. Moving on to 8, part of leadership again is influencing and inspiring. Make sure you inspire the folks on your team. Make sure that you take the time to offer them rewards and to recognize them any chance that you get. And then last but not least, keep trying new things. Now, this particular slide, our last slide, is talking about the focus on service. And what's critically important when we talk about focusing on service is making sure that we stay dialed in our organizational statements. Our organizational statements is our mission, our vision, and our values. And looking at it from an internal perspective with our internal customers, which is the members of our team, and then as well as our external, doesn't matter what we're doing or how we're going about getting the mission done. What's critically important is that if we stay focused on our organizational statements and really empower our members to make a difference, that's how we get their buy-in. And that has a positive impact or reflection on the service that we provide. So if our organizational statements is our foundation, and we empower members of the team to be part of the process, to contribute to even stating what our mission, vision, and values are, our overall service will be positively impacted, because now we have team member buy-in. And that is just so very important when we talk about wanting to establish goals, wanting to be able to do things that we haven't done before in the name of being proactive. So if you want to increase the service that you provide, you get buy-in from your memberships by empowering them, but also make sure that if anything is in conflict with your organizational statements, then you shouldn't do it. It has been my absolute honor and privilege to be with you all today, to talk about transformational servant leadership, and just thank you so very much for your time and attention. I look forward to answering any questions that you all may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. It has really been fascinating. Lots of questions have been coming in. We're going to start back with the first one and work through as many as we can. And let me mention again, if you have a question, type it into the text chat and we'll be happy to answer it. We'll go on and right up to the top of the hour if necessary to get all these questions answered. George asked the first question, was wondering about robotics technology currently being used in Oakland, California.
So great question. So currently, we do not have any robotics. It is on our to-do list to look at. I am a consultant for a international client that is looking to heavily rely on robotics for fire and emergency services. So all the research that I've been doing for the client, I've really been looking to see how I can implement it here in Oakland. So it's on the forefront. We have sensors that we use for wildland fires through Department of Homeland Security. We're part of a pilot program to detect early detection of smoke so that we can respond sooner rather than later. But no robotics currently, but keep an eye out. We'll be looking to use it in the near future.
Thank you. Tiffany asks, it's both a comment and I don't know if it's a question or not, but it's well worth discussing. Tiffany's in a rural area in Texas, actually outside of San Antonio. She said there's a contrast between volunteer and career fire departments in Comal County. We actually have a lot of controversy over the volunteer fire department in Spring Branch and the Bulverde Spring Branch Fire and EMS. I don't know if you're an experience, you've had an opportunity to cross over and work with volunteers and volunteer companies. But if you had a comment about that, I'm sure Tiffany would appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tiffany. I'm familiar with both organizations, and even a good friend of mine just happens to be the fire chief in Houston. But this occasional disagreement between career and volunteer organizations, unfortunately, is not uncommon. And I tell people all the time when people ask me the question of my opinion on volunteer organizations or my opinion on the perception of the relationship between the two, it goes right back to this last slide, right? We should be focused on service. So if we have two organizations, one is career, one is volunteer, but both are trying their best to provide the best service they can to their respective jurisdiction, why would we not just support them? If we call ourselves a fire service family, and there are differences between, in some instances, there are differences in service between a volunteer and a career organization. If we work together and understand each other's strengths and weaknesses for the sake of the people, it goes back to our customers and our stakeholders. If we care about the people that we are serving, then we would not have unnecessary disagreements or arguments about who's doing what or who's better than who. It's all about the fire service and providing a service to our residents and a service to the visitors.
Thank you. Excellent answer. George asks a bundle of questions, but let me take one first. It says, is PSTD as noticeable in fire departments as it is in the Department of Defense? And having worked in both, you're probably an expert on that.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. It is very much an issue, George. In the last 3 years running, there have been more firefighters that have committed suicide in contrast to dying in the line of duty. It is a crisis in our profession. I can tell you we have 3 shifts here in Oakland, and on one of the 3 shifts, there are 6 active divorces that are currently happening. We have members who have to turn to or feel they have to turn to drugs or alcohol to cope with their cumulative traumatic experiences, as well as EAP being utilized more than ever. And so my office works very closely with our union to ensure that all of our members know that there is help if they need it. And we try our best to do away with the stigma of asking for help. You know, we consistently say it's a sign of strength to say, I need to talk to someone and I need help, because it's not an issue just in the state of California, it's nationwide. We have a crisis with our firefighters and our firefighters' mental health for a multitude of different reasons. So thank you for asking the question, and thank you for acknowledging it. It is something that we are 100% committed to addressing as an organization, but it's very much a challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. George, I'm going to skip over your other question temporarily to allow some others to get their questions in. Jen, asks this: within my organization, rewards, and she puts rewards in quotes, are non-existent. And as a manager, eventually thank you only goes so far after each time. What advice do you have on rewards that are not driven by the top line? And maybe she means the bottom line, but talk a little bit about the whole concept of rewarding and acknowledgement.
That's a good question. So, I've always, because of being a student of leadership and actually experiencing bad leadership, right? Because we don't only learn things from effective leaders, we also learn from observing the behaviors and actions of persons who demonstrated poor leadership. So acknowledging folks is something that I've always gravitated towards, because I know how much it means to me. And just getting the feedback from members, I know how much it means to them as well. So prime example, every year, the city gives us tenure certificates. So anniversary certificates, and they're in 5-year increments. And it's about 100 plus every year. Now I can easily put those certificates in pony envelopes and have them delivered to every firehouse for those members who are being recognized. But I make it a point to personally deliver these certificates and acknowledge these individuals in front of their peers for their 5, 10, 25, 30 years of service. Is it challenging for me to do so? Yeah. Does it make for long days? Absolutely. But is it well worth it? Yes, indeed it is. And I wouldn't change it for anything else. And I encourage anyone within our organization, if someone goes above and beyond, we actually have a procedure, a documented codified procedure. If one of our members goes above and beyond, they send that notification to the administration, and the administration can acknowledge those individuals for their hard work. So if you currently don't have anything in place, be the catalyst of change. Feel empowered enough to be able to offer up your recommendations. And if you would like to get other members of the team to provide their feedback, their input, so it's not just coming from you, then I would highly, highly recommend you do so. So you can either make those recommendations on your own or get some feedback from other members of the team, and then you all could be the catalyst to that change.
I think we have time for just one more question, and this is a great summation question from Amanda. It says, what do you think is the greatest takeaway for those in leadership as civilians? Do you feel we can learn from you as a transformational servant leader to take back to our own organizations?
Have the courage to always do the right thing. That's one thing that persons in positions of authority don't do enough. And even those who may not have legitimate authority, but they're still informal leaders, one of the hardest things for them to do is simply just to do the right thing, because they're afraid of repercussions, they're afraid of retaliation, they're afraid of being criticized, they're afraid of being marginalized. And so part of exercising leadership is, first and foremost, having the courage to do it, no matter how unpopular or how dangerous it may be for you. And that is something that I encourage everyone to do. Lead from where you are. And I can remember even being a firefighter. I wasn't a sworn officer, a company officer, but I still spoke up on things that I felt needed to be addressed. Was there a chance that I would be retaliated against? Absolutely. But I was willing to address those issues as they came. So Amanda, I would say the first part of exercising leadership is having the courage to do so. Doesn't matter if you have the official title or rank. It helps when you do, but it doesn't matter if you do or you don't. You can still lead from where you are.
With that, that is a beautiful answer. I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. We actually have some other questions that came up. Harvey, we are going to send a link to the recording and I will send you the slides. Everybody who registered will get that. So let me move on now to the final conclusion of our webinar. I want to talk about the very next one, which will be on February 16th with Dr. Darren Dillow, and it's occupational safety and health, emphasis on mental well-being. Now, this one is interesting because in the past, in the safety occupation, particularly in construction and in manufacturing, the goal has been physical safety, to keep someone from being injured or hurt on the job. But more recently, we begin to understand, and Dr. Freeman just mentioned the high incidence of suicide among firefighters. That's true among the military and anybody in high stress jobs, the level of divorce. Mental health well-being has a great impact on job performance. And that's what Dr. Dillow will be talking about. It's not just simply about safety as a profession, but the whole idea of keeping people mentally well, emotionally secure while they work for more effective employment. So that's coming up. We'll send out information about that. To register for any webinar or to view on-demand webinars, you can just go to our website. That's where we have everything. We'll be posting this one early next week. I want to also mention, as we wrap up, a copy of the slides and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants, so simply watch for an email. And also, we have many people who view this live, but we also have a large contingent of people who view it on demand. Whether you view it live or on demand, we're happy to send you a certificate of completion for 1 hour of participation. All you have to do is just simply reply to the email that we send out with a link to the recording, and I'll be happy to provide that for you. I want to thank all of the participants today, and particularly to thank our presenter for this fabulous talk. I'm going to give Dr. Freeman one more opportunity to throw out a single book or a single resource that he thinks all of us should invest in that would be helpful. I'm going to put you on the spot there for that, but the book that all of us should own if we're in management roles.
You know, Bill, that's a tough one, man. There's a lot of great ones out there, but I'll make it easy for our participants. Anything by John Maxwell. I love every single book that he has written. 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is one that is always a go-to that I revisit periodically, but trust me, if you're not familiar with John Maxwell and his leadership books, check it out. You will not be disappointed.
Okay, with that, that will be the concluding thought that we leave with everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Dr. Freeman, thank you for this marvelous presentation. It's been a joy, and we look forward to seeing many of you next month. So with that, we will officially stop, and I wish you all a great afternoon. With that, we're done. Bye.